This is AgriTalk, a national talk show devoted to issues that affect farmers and all residents of rural America.
From the national studios of Farm Journal Radio, this is AgriTalk. On air, online, across the nation, around the world.
That is what got us to today. AgriTalk has been starting, leading, and moving forward the conversation about farming, ranching, and rural life for the past 30 years. Let's celebrate with a couple of Hall of Famers.
Live from August via Farm Journal Studios, this is AgriTalk. This morning, it's AgriTalk's 30th birthday. We'll hear from AgriTalk hosts of yore. Ken Root and Mike Adams will join us, along with longtime producer extraordinaire John Herath. Directly following the news, Greg Henderson from Drovers. I'm handsome newsman Davis Michelson. Now, here's the host of AgriTalk, Chip Flory.
All right, Davis Michelson, thank you so much, brother. Here we are, 30 years
30
in on AgriTalk. It's absolutely amazing, the history that has been discussed, the topics that have been brought forward, the conversations that have happened, the newsmakers, one right after the other, that have been guests on AgriTalk. The list is pretty astonishing, and we are going to relive some of those days with Ken and Mike and John and you and me. I'm looking forward to the conversation on today's show, dude. It's going to be a ton of fun.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome.
Yeah, no doubt. How's things in your area?
Oh, I think we're okay. Yeah. We've got our AgriTalk birthday cake here for breakfast.
Good.
And we've got I was thinking maybe carrot cake for breakfast because it's healthy. But we're going full bore for lunch.
Breakfast champion.
Yeah. And then of course pork cake for supper tonight. Looking forward to it. It's a big day. Let's celebrate.
I think we should have maybe started with the pork cake. It makes you smarter.
You're not going to want that for breakfast, though. You're going to carry that around all day if you're not careful.
Yeah, that's probably right. When you've got Farm Broadcasting Hall of Famers on the show with you, you got to be the top of your game, dude.
That's right.
Top of your game.
And best behavior, which I am working on.
No, do you know who these guys are? I don't know if we need the best behavior or not.
True.
We're just going to be trying to keep up with Ken and Mike when we get them on the show here in a bit. John as well. All right, buddy, let's get started with the news. What do you got?
Well, I'm going to start with the weather, and I would have sworn we said this yesterday, but this is today's. Dangerous heat will persist over the south central plains and mid-south. The heat will spread south and east to the lower Mississippi Valley, Gulf Coast, and mid-Atlantic through Friday. Another heat wave is building across the northwest and northern high plains through Saturday. Severe thunderstorms and flash flooding are expected across portions of the Great Lakes, South Bend, and Ohio Valley regions today. 79 degrees, sunny. We had a thunderstorm overnight, Chip.
Yeah. I'm actually in southeast Minnesota, southeast Wisconsin this morning, and some light rain this morning, but it's going to be another scorcher here. There's no question.
Same. Well, private exporters reported sales of 132,000 metric tons of soybeans for delivery to China during the 24-25 marketing year. 132,000. Okay, that's great. Chip?
Yes, we still got a long ways to go before this turns into a number that we can feel good about on the soybean export side of things. We'll get market update from Brian Grady at the bottom of the hour, but we've got beans under pressure again this morning, 7 to 9 cents lower.
Yep. Well, Brent crude oil prices have risen above $81 per barrel following a 3.6% increase in the previous session. The spike comes after reports that Iran has ordered a retaliatory strike on Israel, as reported by the New York Times. The strike is said to be in response to Israel's alleged assassination of a Hamas leader in Tehran and a senior Hezbollah member in Beirut. Meanwhile, WTI crude futures opened the session under light pressure, and looking out to the D's here, we're lower still. We're down 38 cents, but we're at 75.04 on the December WTI here.
But Davis, these tensions in the Middle East, it's been, I got to imagine it's been since the 70s that the tensions have been as high as they are right now. And I'm talking about the, the hostage days as well. This is as tense as I can recall.
Yep. Well, the Federal Reserve held interest rates steady in a range of 5.25% to 5.5% as expected, but seemingly suggested a reduction could come as early as the next meeting in September. The Fed did not commit in its statement to a rate cut in September, though the wording in the statement did seem to point in that direction. This is interesting, Chip. Little factoid here. Since 1980, the Fed has either hiked or cut rates in every single election except for 2012, when, as we all know, rates were at zero. Economy kind of still getting over that financial crisis. But that's an interesting thought there.
Yeah, it very much is an interesting thought. And the Fed has talked about how they don't want to become a political issue. Well, they've waited long enough now that they are a political issue.
Well, and speaking of pork, Chip, at the urging of the National Pork Producers Council, a newly published USDA study found 0 trichinella positives, that's 0 with a Z, in more than 3.2 million U.S. pork samples. NPP says that demonstrates to domestic and global consumers how safe the U.S. pork supply is for consumption. I'm walking proof, Chip. Safe for consumption. Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. When you get that loin to 145, quit cooking and get it off of the grill. All right, Davis. Hey, thank you so much. Stay tuned and be part of the conversation coming up. Greg Henderson, editorial director at Drovers, joins us. How you doing, Greg?
Good morning. I'm fine, Chip. Thank you.
All right. No July inventory report. What do we know about the cow herd?
Well, we know that several ag economists have done their own estimates, and there's several data points that they use to create those, including that cow slaughter number that we know is down significantly from the past 2 years. But CattleFax is saying that the beef cow inventory, they think it's down about 400,000 cows from last year. That would be record low. And then even that beef replacement heifer inventory, they think it's likely steady to slightly higher. They're saying 50,000 more heifers than last year. But the big deal, Chip, is going to be that calf crop, and that we're missing that mid-year inventory to tell us what that number, or give us an estimate of that number. And CattleFax expects that 24 calf crop to be 700,000 head lower and record small, a reflection of that smaller breeding herd. And the smaller calf crop will continue to translate into what they call tighter feeder cattle and fed cattle supplies down the road. So altogether, CattleFax is saying they feeder cattle and calf supply remaining outside feed yards to be down 850,000 head. Wow. That's 2.5%. So I have one more data point from the Drovers State of the Beef Industry survey. Found that just 44% of ranchers in our survey say they plan to expand their herds over the next 5 years. I think
what percent?
44%.
Wow.
Yeah, and obviously it gets even smaller over 55 years of age.
Right. Good stuff, Greg. Thanks, buddy. Appreciate it. We'll talk to you later.
Thank you, Chip.
All right. It is AgriTalk's 30th anniversary. Let's get the original guys in here. Ken Root, Mike Adams, John Herath, Davis Michelson, and me here on AgriTalk.
I think I'll take a moment, celebrate my age.
Our name says it all. AgriTalk. What more do you need to know?
Now it's time to focus in on where I go from here. Lord, have mercy on my next 30 years.
All right. Welcome back to AgriTalk.
You got another 30 in you, buddy? Another 30 in you?
You know, I'm at least going to get the next 30 started.
Okay.
You might have to take it all the way to the end. I'm not sure.
Ho.
Hey, what?
Yeah. Well, my people do tend to live a very long time. Very long time.
Yes.
I think I could do it.
Yes, they do.
I think I could do it.
Davis Michelson, happy anniversary.
Same to you, brother.
Here we are.
Great. Yeah.
Celebrating the 30th anniversary of AgriTalk, and we're going to do it right. Yep. Let's bring in the OG from August 1st, 1994 to July of 2001. The host of AgriTalk was Ken Root, and he joins us right now. Ken, it's great to talk with you, man. How are you?
Well, I'm doing fine, Chip. The show sounds really good. I would only caution you on an anniversary show. It may be like my father, who was 90, who was traveling with me, and he wanted to see Wheel of Fortune. Yeah. And we got in there at 6:30 to watch it, and they were celebrating their anniversary. And he looked at it and he said, "Turn it off. They ain't going to have the puzzle."
Well, we don't want anybody to do that, Ken. We want people to stick around for this.
Well, it shows you, who you are and where you are, depending upon how the listeners see you and hear you. And we had a great response from listeners at the onset of the show 30 years ago.
Yep.
And it was a very interesting experience, to say the least, to pull it into perspective of what we were attempting to do. We were actually a public affairs show about rural America for my 7 years.
Right.
And we were controversial. We were very active in going everywhere we could go. We found a number of other shows that were fun to do that had a tremendous response from people. And so we kind of whetted it down to where we thought we could accomplish. But the 90s, and of course the current day is the same, just what you were saying about Iran right now this morning. We didn't know what was going to happen next. The Clintons were in office, and then in 94, the Democrats lost out in the House and Senate, and we brought in people from the Midwest that we knew as senators and representatives. And then we went on through the ethanol period that rose up in the late 90s, thanks to Newt Gingrich. And then we went on through the presidential election of 2000. There were so many things that were unpredictable, but we followed them, as you do, every day.
Yeah. Fantastic, Ken. I want to talk more about that first day on the air. We're going to do that. But right now, Mike Adams was the host from July 2001 through December 2017. Mike joins us now. Mike, it is so good to talk to you. How are you?
Great, Chip. Good to talk with you and hear from Ken again. You brought back a lot of memories. Ken probably did for you as well when 10:06 and you heard the music, and it kind of brought back memories of thinking, here we go. We're about to do another show.
That's right.
It brought back a lot of good memories.
Exactly. And I want to talk about some of those memories, and a lot of your memories, Mike, are going to include John Herath, producer for the Mike Adams era on AgriTalk. John, it's great to talk with you, man. How are you?
Gentlemen, it's such a great honor to be here with all three of you. I'm just tickled to death to be part of this.
I'm glad you're here. Jump in when you get a chance. But I want to go back to Ken right away, at least in this segment. 1994, Ken. Agriculture still trying to recover from the crisis. We had the floods in 1993. That kind of changed the markets. What do you remember most? What was the inspiration to start AgriTalk?
Well, believe it or not, AgriTalk was started by Pioneer Seed and McCormick Advertising. Can you hear me all right?
Yes. Yeah.
And as a result of them coming together, they wanted to have an interaction between people in the field, their customers, and someone that could go back and forth. So our first charge, and what we used for years as our slogan, was information you want and the voice you need. And so we were caller driven. And I think that from the beginning, that set us apart from others. We got to get down to this. I am not Orion Samuelson. I am not Mike Adams. I got to do something out of the mainstream or they're going to fire me. So I had to figure out how I could be one who could fit into this. And so I became pretty much adversarial against both sides. And I argued the case that was pretty much opposite the caller or the guest, or the caller and the guest, to get more on the table. I always said if you were informed, you could make good choices. And so we picked issues that were hot at the time, but we did it with the blessing of our sponsors. because what they told us they wanted was audience, radio stations and audiences. So I want to give credit to my producers for coming up with these shows, Rustin Hamilton, Julie Doan, and I hope that that set the stage for the realization, obviously it has, that you need a producer to work with the talent to make this show go. And that's happened with John, and it's happening with Joe now, and other producers. Ken Rogers was Mike's when he first started. But once we got into these issues on the air, we didn't know where they were going to go. And this was the beginning of big hog farms. And if you want to get people to call you from rural America, they're 92% of our audience, we found, never called us. But those that did were usually mad. They had fire in their belly, like they did not want big hog farms near them. They did not want fill in the blank that you still can in rural America. And so we would talk about why, and we would bring both sides on the air. We got into the checkoffs pretty heavily. They still hate me for that. But I will tell you that the beef checkoff, the pork checkoff, and the soybean checkoff are all still there. And we just let the other side have a voice in this. And we then had a big enough audience that we were attractive to literally everybody, from politicians all the way down. And once we got that critical mass, Mike and Chip, both of you know, that's what you have to get these people on. And once you started getting them on, then obviously the quality of your program can go up.
Right. Absolutely. That's fascinating stuff, Ken. Mike, you and John were road warriors. Basically lived on the road, didn't you?
Yeah, we really did. I used to joke, and it wasn't a joke. I saw him more than I saw my own wife. You know, we were gone a lot. Sometimes, out of a month, we'd only be home maybe on weekends. I mean, we were on the road a lot, and a lot of that was by design. When I came into the show in 2001, and I think Ken hit it right on the head. You find your niche, and I knew I wasn't going to be Ken Root. My style wasn't the same as Ken's. I often said when I started, I knew there was a percentage of the audience that would never accept me because I wasn't Ken. There was a percentage of the audience that would love me because I wasn't Ken, and then there was a group that I felt was undecided, and I really wanted to focus on them if I could kind of get them under the tent, and part of the show. And I think that's what we were able to do. But one day I was sitting in my office and I was listening to the Jim Rome Sports Show, and he was out on a tour. He was doing his show in various locations. And I got to thinking about that. And with my background having in Illinois as a local farm broadcaster, having covered ethanol so closely, I thought, why don't we do an ethanol pump tour to promote ethanol? Well, that also got us out on the road a lot, and that really got us established. And that led into my second idea was, let's do a hometown tour where we'd go into these small towns and let their own citizens tell their story. And that not only put us on the road, but it let me meet our listeners, and it let me learn their issues so I could better address them on the air, because I would have an idea here's what's happening in this part of the country. Here's what's happening in this particular state. And then you add the meetings that we were going to. And then all of a sudden, John was saying, hey, you want to go to Puerto Rico, or how about we go to, South America, or wherever, which was quite an experience. But we started taking the show not only across the country, but out of the country as well. And I want to say this about you mentioned, Ken, the relationship with your producer. One thing you told me early on, and I learned this quickly. You said, when it comes to the technical part, trust your producer. You don't know, we didn't know what we were doing, but they knew what they were doing. And I learned that real quick with John. Just let him do his magic. And I just tried to stay out of his way. If I could help him, fine. If not, just let him do his thing. I just concentrated on being on the air. And John always got us on the air one way or another.
Exactly. If he needs a little help packing up the cords when everything is said and done, we can help do that. But boy, you got to stay out of their way. That is absolutely right. Guys, we're coming up on a break. I don't know if you remember that or not, but we do have breaks in the show. So we're going to take one here real quick. We are celebrating 30 years of AgriTalk with Ken Root, Mike Adams, John Herath, Davis Michelson, and me, your host, Chip Flory, here on AgriTalk.
Time for Markets Now with the experts from Pro Farmer.
Pro Farmer editor Brian Grady joins us right now. Beej, when I take a look at what's going on in these grain markets, it feels like it's more of the same story in the soy complex with beans and oil under pressure.
Yeah, definitely, Chip. Soy oil just really taking it on the chin this morning, sharply lower. Soybeans are trading anywhere from 8 to 9 cents lower here at mid-morning, and so new for the move low in soybeans on the day here, and just more technical erosion. No real crop concerns at this point in time in the market's eye, and so there's no real reason for them to trade higher, and we're just continuing to see an erosion from a price perspective. That's spilling over into the corn market, 1 to 2 cents lower in most of those contracts. December corn hit a new contract low earlier this morning at $3.95.
Yeah, $3.95 in the D's corn, and we're knocking on the door of a $9 handle in the September soybeans. This is quite a bit of pressure, and it's not wanting to let up. That is for sure. And you talk about pressure, man, oh man, the cattle are just getting hammered today. What's going on?
Yeah, absolutely, Chip. Sharp losses in both live cattle and feeders, and the selling here is somewhat technical based, and feeders they're leading to the downside despite the weakness in the corn market that we talked about, and so just complete erosion within the cattle complex here. The hog futures trading much better, just mildly trading to the upside, but in the face of that heavy selling in the cattle market, not performing too poorly. Support continues to come from the rising cash index, and that's up for a 13th straight day now.
Excellent. Thank you, Brian. That is Pro Farmer editor Brian Grady on Markets Now.
Opinions expressed on AgriTalk do not necessarily reflect the views of Farm Journal Broadcasting, affiliate stations, or sponsors. Our name says it all. AgriTalk. What more do you need to know?
Welcome back to AgriTalk on our 30th anniversary. We've got a celebration going with Ken Root, Mike Adams, John Herath, Davis Michelson, and me, Chip Flory. John Herath.
Yeah.
We were talking about all the traveling that you and Mike did together, that you saw each other more than you saw your own families for a chunk of time. You guys were on the road constantly, but I do remember one time when Mike let me have a shot at the morning show, and you and I were set up in the middle of the Mississippi River.
Oh, that was such a fun day. That was a blast.
Yep.
And a technical challenge, but it was fun trying to figure out how we were going to do that, and then actually pulling it off that day with minimal hiccups.
Yes. Well, and part of the reason that we had minimal hiccups is because we had a guy out there on the boat with us making sure that the next guest was ready to go. And that guy, he had a little experience with AgriTalk. That was Ken Root.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that was great fun. And luckily a towboat didn't come by and wipe you out. But there we sat with all these farmers on those pontoon boats that they just happened to have there, tied up and in the channel, and talking about river transportation. We had people from the Corps of Engineers, the lockmaster from Guttenberg. It was really a well-done piece of work.
And quite a flotilla out there in the middle of the river.
It certainly was. And we had a call, if you will remember. We had a call from Kansas. One Mr. Ken McCauley called in while we were out on the river to talk about, even though he was out in Kansas, to talk about the importance of just that river transportation system. And Mike, that's one spot that I want to get back to you on right now, because it's the agricultural story is so much about connecting dots, and why what we are talking about is important. And nobody did a better job of connecting dots than Mr. Mike Adams. It was one of the reasons that everybody listened to the show, Mike.
Well, I appreciate that, Chip. And I think that's the importance of shows like this, that you do make those connections and you get the voices on the air. And I think more than ever now, you talked about earlier the tensions in the Middle East. I think it's so important that even though it's an agriculture-based show, we make sure we realize that we can't just live in this little bubble by ourselves, and you have to reach out. And what's the backstory? What are the factors affecting agriculture, and then how is agriculture affecting everybody else? And I think we tried to do that by the people we got on the air and the places we went to. And I thought I had two areas I really wanted to focus on. Biofuels was a big emphasis for me, but also ag policy and legislation. And we worked very hard. John did a great job of getting us lined up with guests in Washington, D.C. And I'll never forget one time we were in D.C. at the Canadian Embassy, and the ambassador there came up to me and said, "I listen to you every morning so that I know what's going on in agriculture in the United States, what's happening, especially in the Midwest." He said that helped him with his job. And I thought that was a pretty good compliment.
Yes, it certainly is. It certainly is. And John, that has been a staple of AgriTalk for 30 years, that it has not only been moving conversations forward, participating in conversations, but leading thought and making sure that those issues, I mean, like Mike talked about, biofuels and policy, it's something that we focus on each and every week here on AgriTalk. The conversations continue, don't they?
Yeah, well, and I think an important component of that we need to touch on is the real power of AgriTalk has always been the audience. I mean, Big Apple Joe and I know very well how difficult it is trying to schedule guests every day, multiple guests a day, every week. And the only reason our calls got answered is because of the power and the quality of the audience of AgriTalk, of the kind of people they are, the numbers. And when we had Senator Grassley on, he would hear about it from the audience, from his constituents, and it made that job so much easier, and it made the impact of AgriTalk so much stronger because of that involvement of you out there listening to the show.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. And Big Apple Joe is making a point in the notes that we share back and forth right now. Ken, how in the world did you get people to sign up, affiliates, to sign up to put you on the air back in 1994?
It was quite a challenge, but I'll tell you, Rich Hull did it. And Mark Vail and Mark Perrin created the show. That was our executive producer and owner. And then they hired Rich, and he went out basically on a shoe shine and a smile and went to every radio station around the country that was in our A group to talk to them if they would come on. And we did not get anybody for a while. In fact, when you brought up 30 years, there were people that said, you won't last 30 days. Right. You're going to run out of material.
Right.
And they would say, we're just not going to do this. But really, the era was such that Rush Limbaugh was popularizing talk radio. And there were still individual radio station ownership. One or two stations was all most people owned at the time in 94. That all changed a great deal. But we got one station, KOEL, in Old Wine, Iowa.
Yep.
Tom Parsley, who's still a friend of mine, agreed. And once he agreed, he was an A station and he broke the dam. And those managers all knew each other. And before long, we had about 80 stations when we went on the air.
Yes. Yeah,
hey, Chip, if I could jump in here real quick, Chip, I want to say, because having done this myself with another show, creating one from the beginning, I can appreciate even more what Ken and Rich and everybody went through in getting that first one established. I mean, it's just amazing. And then the relationships you built with not only your audience, but with those affiliate radio stations was so key. And that's why we like going out and we did a lot of remotes and events and allowed the affiliates to kind of build their programming around that. We had some great times in different locations with our affiliate stations. And that was so important. I remember when I took over after Ken, being on a conference call with a lot of affiliate stations, their managers, program directors, And I had to explain to them who I was in many cases and why Ken wasn't there anymore and why we were changing. And hey, it's going to be okay. We'll be okay. It'll be different, but it'll be okay. And they had to get on board with that for it to continue.
Yes, that's absolutely right. When we started Market Rally, which is now the second hour of AgriTalk in the afternoons, much of the same stuff was happening. That conversation, just gaining confidence that we weren't going to run out of things to talk about because we're talking about things that we do every day, and it's timely. News never ends. That's the bottom line, and we were into it. Okay, Mike, you mentioned that you wanted to make sure that we weren't just talking in the agricultural bubble on AgriTalk, and I agree. That's something that we have to do. But you were on the air on September 11, 2001. How did you do that? I know that you and John made the decision that that you were going to stay on the air, right?
Well, I tell you, we were in Dodge City, Kansas, doing a remote with High Plains Journal. And what I remember about that day, I came down from my room at the motel, and TV in the lobby, a lot of times you're eating breakfast and watching that. Mm-hmm. And just as I was coming down, I looked over the TV, and that's when the first plane hit. Oh, and man. Nobody really knew what was going on. Thought it was just an accident or something like that. So there were still so many questions. So got ready, got packed up. We were headed to the site where we're going to do the show. And then a second plane hits. And when we went on the air that morning, still had very little idea what was really happening. And we just kind of scrapped whatever the planned show was for that day and just tried to react based on what little information we knew, which was so very little at that point. And it was really hard to do a show because of all the uncertainty and the questions that were surrounding it. So we just kind of somehow got through that show. And I remember driving back from Dodge City back to Bonner Springs. It was so quiet. It was like nothing was happening, no planes in the air. Everything was so quiet. And the show I really remember was the next day, kind of did an open line, and we had a little more information what had happened. And people were calling in, talking about going to church and praying, and the solemn mood that there was. I'll never forget that, the heaviness in the air and the feeling, the emotion we heard from our listeners. That was a very moving time.
John?
Well, actually, that was Ken Root just before me. I was still at the state of Illinois at that point.
I gotcha. Okay. All right. Well, it was a time I remember exactly what I was doing, and we were fairly new to Farm Journal at that time. Pro Farmer was fairly new to Farm Journal. We were getting ready to go out and have a meeting with the focus group. Had to cancel that meeting and focus on what was important at that time, and to have to do it live and on the air, Mike, that is really something. Okay, so we've gone through 30 years. We've got one segment left. What should we do the next 30 years? I got to get this advice from Ken Root and Mike Adams here on AgriTalk.
If the world is your oyster, we've got pearls of wisdom on AgriTalk.
Welcome back to AgriTalk. Glad that you're with us for this 30th anniversary celebration. Davis Michelson, you have been uncharacteristically quiet. What are your thoughts?
I've just been hanging back here in the peanut gallery, but I do have a question for our panel. 10:06 Central Time. Mike Adams mentioned it. That time looms large in our collective legend. So on a Saturday or on vacation or really any time of day that I hear a bell like that, I have to remind myself it's Saturday, or, I'm on. You don't have to be on the air right now. You didn't forget to write the news. I'm beginning to wonder if I will ever be able to sleep past 10 a.m. ever again. I pose to you, dear panel, does this wear off ever?
Yeah, when I'm on the seventh hole at 10 o'clock in the morning, I never think about, do I need to do an interview or not? But I will say this: whenever a big news story happens, and this still happens to me, there's some kind of a reaction in me, like, okay, who am I going to get on to talk about that?
Yeah.
And then I think, wait a minute, I don't have to do that anymore. But that's still part of me. That still stays with you.
Now, the same with me. As soon as Trump was shot, I was with the neighbors the other day, and I just immediately thought, just like Mike did. But the other side of this is that as you get older, you'll pick up another doctor called a urologist, and you'll find that the problem you have is going to wake you up every morning at 5 o'clock, whether you like it or not.
Well, that's very handy. I'll be looking forward to that. Thank you, Ken.
Yeah.
Oh my
Hey,
gosh.
Chip, I wanted to say, stories that we could go on, and I knew this time would go quickly, but I think if you go back and look at certain events, I think of some shows John and I did in Washington, D.C. with Missouri Farm Bureau that really stand out. And I mentioned earlier we went to South America, but there was a show we did with Wayne Pacelli, who was head of HSUS at that time. And I really struggled with, do I put him on the air or not and let him talk about, I was so opposed to what he was doing and what that group was doing. So I kind of put it out to our listeners. I said, do you want this guy on or not? And I would get some said yes, some said no. One guy emailed me, said, don't put him on. He may convince us he's right. And, that type of thing. But I finally went ahead and did it. And I remember opening that show. This would have been Ken Root style. I opened the show by saying, I don't think I've ever had a guest on that I disagreed with so much in my life. And that kind of set the tone for the show. But we had more comments on that show. Than I think, more than almost any of the other shows we had. And that showed the power, I think, of getting both sides on the air. You don't just have to be on the air saying, well, what you agree with. And I think that's the problem we have in media today. Everybody just picks a media that they agree with. You still need a platform out there that puts all sides out there and presents different views, and then let the listeners make their own choices and decisions.
Exactly, Mike. I've got a great example of that for when I was the host as well. I always knew that cattlemen were independent, but boy, when you talk about a group that has some different thoughts. You've got the U.S. Cattlemen, you've got RCAF, you've got National Cattlemen's Association, you've got Southern Feeders, you've got Northern Feeders, you've got cow-calf producers, you've got backgrounders. They all think differently. And when we had the U.S. Cattlemen, NCBA, a Southern Feeder, and a Northern Feeder all on the show at the same time, talking about some really tough issues. I thought it was a fantastic show. We had Kelly Neuenhaus and Trent Luce on the show at the same time talking about CO2 pipelines not that long ago. Two very different thoughts from two very well-spoken people, but they were respectful of each other. They were civil, and we hashed out the issues on the show. That's, to me, guys, if there's one thing, Ken said it early. He's no Orion Samuelson, never tried to be. Mike, you said it. No Ken Root, never tried to be. I've never tried to be Ken Root or Mike Adams. Let's do it ourselves. But if there's one thing that has run consistent is, let's put all the issues on the table. And if we're going to be successful for another 30 years, Ken Root, we got to continue to do that, right?
Well, I think what you're saying is that this show has evolved and will continue to evolve. And my era was over. I want to say that AgriTalk, when I decided to step away, was unsustainable as what it was. And one of the reasons was that we had polarized this country during the 90s, beginning in 94, I think, when we saw that big change in the House and Senate. That was the Republicans sweeping out the Democrats and going to freedom to farm election. We saw the bombing in Oklahoma City, and then all of the people that had conspiracy theories after that, and they got on one side or they got on the other. And then we went through, in agriculture, in my era, The Livestock Marketing Association took on the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, just what you were saying, Chip, and they took it all the way to the Supreme Court to try to kill that checkoff. That's how much that people were in disagreement with each other, even though they were all in agriculture. So as I stepped away, Mike absolutely was the perfect guy for this. I recommended him at the time. I told him all I knew at the time, which didn't take me very long. And then he just took it from there, and he went the right direction for the 21st century. He really put it in perspective of a 21st century farm broadcaster covering what needed to be covered in mainstream agriculture. And then, Chip, you've done the same thing. After you, if there is anyone, whether you kill the show or not, it's up to you, Chip. We will then see what direction people have the guts to go. But you've got to have commercial support.
Yep.
You've got to have an audience. You got to have radio stations now. You may not have to have radio stations in the future, but I don't mean that badly.
No.
I was exactly the National Farm Broadcasters Organization, and I saw 20 years ago we were going to have to deal with the internet era.
Right.
So I don't know what it'll be next, but I think you're moving the right way, and you're doing the right thing every day.
I want to say a big thank you to 2 Hall of Famers of the National Association of Farm Broadcasting, 2 past hosts of AgriTalk. It's been fun helping this show get to 30 years, but it's been more fun getting to know you guys and calling you friends over the years. Ken, Mike, John Herath, thank you so much. Davis, take the show this afternoon. You and Michelle Rook here on AgriTalk.